Welcome to C4ISR and Network's PM Roundtable with WIN-T, the Warfighter Information Network Tactical, an organization within the Army's Program Executive Office for Command, Control, Communications Tactical, PEOC3T. I'm Barry Rosenberg, the editor of C4ISR and Networks, and it is my pleasure to welcome the WIN-T leadership team to this one-hour in-depth look at the Army's primary tactical network program. Our participants will explain WIN-T in more detail, but in a nutshell, WIN-T provides the communications network that gives warfighters voice, video, and data in tactical environments. It's a terrestrial system when line of sight is available and seamlessly transitions to a satellite system when line of sight is lost, such as in the mountainous conditions in Afghanistan. It transitions back to more affordable terrestrial comms when line of sight is reestablished. After years of development and demonstrations in places like the White Sands Missile Range, WIN-T Increment 2, the on-the-move aspect of the program, has been fielded to the first 2 brigade combat teams in Afghanistan. And we'll hear about how those deployments are going and what the plans are for future deployments of Increment 2. And this fall at Network Integration Evaluation 15.1 at WISMR, Increment 2 will demonstrate whether it is ready for full rate production. So with that bit of background, let me introduce the team. Colonel Ed Swanson is project manager for the WIN-T program. His workforce of 100 personnel executes an annual budget of more than $1 billion to provide tactical communications to the Army and DoD. The Increment 1 product manager is Lieutenant Colonel Joel Babbitt, who has responsibility for the at-the-halt aspects of the program, as well as airborne mobility. The Increment 2 product manager is Lieutenant Colonel Lamont Hall, who handles on-the-move comms. Increment 3 addresses the netops aspects of the tactical network, and its product manager is Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Roberts. The 4th key member of the WIN-T team is Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Newman, who has responsibility for satellite communications. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining the roundtable today, and let me begin with Colonel Swanson. So Colonel, how have the dynamics of the national fiscal climate and changes to our force structure affected the mission of WIN-T? And how has PM WIN-T realigned its objectives to the challenge that we're facing right now?
First of all, Barry, thank you for inviting the WIN-T leadership team here today to talk a little bit about our program and provide an update. So the basic mission of WIN-T has not changed. Our mission is to provide fully integrated, easy to operate, and cost-effective solutions to the warfighter and to the Army. What has changed is in the fiscal environment, the Army is going to have to prioritize what capabilities they're going to invest in to provide to the soldier and to the Army. Fortunately for PM WIN-T, tactical network modernization is very high up there on that priority list, as is WIN-T. As far as the reduction in force structure, the Army typically expands and contracts based on what our mission requirements are. As we pulled out of Iraq and we're drawing down out of Afghanistan right now, we will reduce the force structure, and how that impacts WIN-T is if we have less units to field, that'll be less equipment that we procure and field, but we will continue to field those capabilities to units throughout the Army.
Do you think that the brigade combat team deployments will be capped now at 2 BCTs for Afghanistan?
I'm not sure what the force structure is ultimately going to be. I've heard numbers of just below 10,000, and what that 10,000 is going to constitute of. It may well be more focused on advising and assist missions, not so much full brigade combat teams deployed.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a place for WIN-T in the pivot to Asia? Is there, and this is something that we can talk about with Lieutenant Colonel Hall as well, is there, it's more of, it's a different sort of environment. Will WIN-T have a role there?
Sure, WIN-T has had a role there, and we will continue to have a role. The main, footprint for the Army in the Pacific to the pivot to the Pacific Rim is in Korea. The 2nd Infantry Division is there, as well as 8th Army and U.S. Forces Korea. Increment 1 just completed an upgrade there in the last year, and Increment 2 will be fielding to those units as well in the next few years.
Great. Let me shift to Lieutenant Colonel Babbitt and talk a little bit about Increment 1, which is the at-the-halt communications capability, formerly used to be known as JNNN, Joint Network Node Network. WIN-T Increment 1 has been fielded to the Army for the full BCTs over the last couple of years, and I'm wondering how you're enhancing that capability and improving it now that it's fully deployed.
Sure. So as you stated, WinT Increment 1 is fielded to the Army. We're in 3 corps, 18 divisions, 155 brigades, 1,275 battalions right now, and 5 regional hubs. So it's basically the current backbone of the Tactical Army. And so as such, because we're fully fielded, we have the opportunity, we're positioned to leverage that infrastructure to become a platform for innovation. Some of the innovations that the Signal Center and the Signal community at large have really been working towards bringing to the fight for some period of time are a large enhancement to the terrestrial communications capability that we have, moving it from its current data rate up to about 12 times that data rate. A better tropospheric scatter capability that will allow us to talk as though we were using satellites, but without satellites, bouncing off the troposphere instead. Capability provided by my brother here in SATCOM. A couple other capabilities we're bringing to the fight is 4G. So right now you've probably got a 4G phone, yet soldiers on the battlefield don't. The capability to bring that 4G to bring 4G to the battlefield for FOBs and for near FOB operations, as well as Wi-Fi to cut the wires in the TOCs, is going to make the Army much more expeditionary. Also, in our partnership with Net Warrior, WinT Increment 1 providing that 4G capability, and Net Warrior leveraging that with their smartphones, their end-user devices as they call them, we're going to provide a significant capability to them as well. So essentially by doing that, we're untethering a lot of the leaders from the command post. They can get out and do more of the hands-on leadership as opposed to being tethered to their SIPR capabilities in the TOCs. They'll be able to get out and do more management by walking around, so to speak, more supervision.
Sure. One of the things that General Dan Hughes, the PEO C3T, has talked a lot about is simplification of the tactical network. It's been mainly an on-the-move Inc. 2 thing. Is there simplification issues and work being done in Inc. 1 as well?
Huge amounts of simplification, and that was really prominent here at NIE 14.2 that we just went through, where we brought those capabilities that I just mentioned, plus some coalition capabilities and some radio bridging capabilities. You know, we're going from static voice routing to dynamic voice routing, kind of a geeky sort of topic, but it's important. It makes your network go, click in faster. We're going from serial modems to IP-based modems. That's both simpler to deal with and also adds throughput enhancements. And we're simplifying a lot of the interfaces for some of our legacy devices as well as for our new devices. That, and we're also providing what we're calling BOLT, Blended Online Training, that allows, the pieces that can't be simplified, we're allowing this evergreen or constantly valid training online to be present so that soldiers can go in and take care of a lot of that training on their own time.
Very good. Let me turn to...
I'll add on to that, Barry, if I could.
Sure.
So Increment 1's doing a lot of things to simplify the network, as is SATCOM, as is Increment 2, and Increment 3 is the netops capability, which is the back-end capability. So the more complexity we can take from the soldier operating the equipment and put it on the back end where there's signal soldiers controlling the network, the better. So across the board in WinT, one of our primary focus areas is making the network easier to install, operate, and maintain, making it as intuitive as possible so it is like your handheld device that you're using off-duty, so it's very easy to, when you change from a Galaxy to an iPhone, it's intuitive and very easy to train and sustain.
Very good. Let's stay on the subject of simplification with Colonel Hall. One of the things we've heard General Hughes say in the area of simplification is that what he's wanted to see is a button, so soldiers know when they press the button it turns green and they know the network is on. And I know you've been working hard to make that happen. Can you tell me a little bit about the simplification work you've done in Increment 2?
Sure. So about a year and a half ago we had an operational test, and one of the feedback elements that came out of that operational test is that we needed to do that. We needed to simplify the network so that the general purpose users at the company level could operate the equipment easier than they could previously. And so what that means is exactly what you were mentioning. Instead of executing 10 or 15 steps to turn on a soldier network extension, and then executing 2 or 3 logon procedures, and then finally getting to turn on the system, we went back and looked at what they expected. And what they expected is what we've been discussing here, is something simple like you do with your handheld device, so that when you push a button, it turns on. And so that was our design goal a year or so ago when we started this, and we've been very successful so far. The 2 developmental tests that we just completed, the soldier feedback has been very positive. The system now, we can do that. It's as simple as taking 1 toggle switch to turn on all the power for everything, and then 1 user ID and log in, and you can turn on the entire system. And then you can tell, as you mentioned, when the system is turned on and connected to the network, there is a green status bar with bars that show the network connection, very similar to what you have on your iPhone or your cell phone device. And so that's what we've done in terms of simplification.
Is there, maybe that's not necessarily the low-hanging fruit or something that was easy to do, but what's the next step? Where's the next round of simplification coming?
So good question, and we're looking at that as well. So within the WIN-T Increment 2 program, we've got some near-term objectives, which I just discussed, and several more that we've done for our upcoming operational test. In the future, we've got some midterm objectives where we want to simplify the network configuration. We want it to make it much easier and less time consuming to stand up the entire network. We want to simplify some of the other processes that we have, such as changing passwords within the system, and we want to look at being able to bring in adjacent units, what they call Unit Task Reorganization, UTR. We want to look at simplifying the process that it takes to bring in other units into your formation and integrate them into your network. And we're working on simplifying all 3 of those in the midterm.
Very good. Let's move over to Increment 3, Colonel Roberts. Increment 3 used to be an aerial tier for WIN-T, and now it's a netops operation. Can you explain what you're doing there in netops? What is that all about?
Yeah, so Increment 3, before the program restructured, had a significant amount of capability, of which the most visible was the air tier, but there was also a lot of ground configuration items we were going to bring. Due to some of the physical constraints, the Army has decided to take away that piece of the program and direct us to focus on the network operations. NetOps is the capability that provides the simplification. Most of the techniques that are out there, each program has provided based upon what they saw their mission at the time, and they've chosen a particular tool that met their needs as best as they could see it. So what we're trying to do going forward is look at how my brother in Increment 1 or Increment 2 have done a particular mission, and if they're not doing it exactly the same, look at ways we can either integrate the 2 tools they're using or establish inroads between their software and Increment 2 software so that the user doesn't have to do all those steps. And we can automate those, therefore the user doesn't have to do it. We don't have to train them on it. It's all done behind the scenes. There's a lot of opportunity there in the network world, and as we've done our transition from that larger hardware software program just to being the software, we're looking both at Increment 1, Increment 2, SATCOM, and even outside of WIN-T, where we can see opportunities for the network tools that have been provided and how to integrate those tools so that the communication officer has the full view of the network, and all the tools, if we can finally get there, are all working together behind the scenes to make his life that much easier.
Sure. Let's talk also about simplification in Inc. 3. How will you address some of the challenges that the S6s and G6s have in managing network operations, and how can you simplify the NetOps interface to better train Army users to manage the network?
So a lot of that comes from looking at how each individual program has delivered that capability, looking at the inputs required and the workflows for the different various networks. So if you're on the lower tier networks with the SRW waveforms versus the upper tier networks, a lot of the steps, a lot of the inputs start with the same. So identifying the unit names, the unit configurations, a lot of those have to be done whether which network you're on. So we're looking at opportunities where we can ingest that data holistically and then behind the scenes using software, push that data to the different pieces of the network so that the operator doesn't have to manually input it or print out from this laptop one set of data, walk over to this laptop, and then manually enter it. There's a lot of opportunity for us to let those software talk together. So that's what we're trying to do, both internal to WinT and even beyond the WinT borders, working with the Mission Command folks, the lower tier radio folks, even in the joint community where it makes sense.
Very good. Let's turn to satellite communications. Colonel Newman, I wonder if you could describe for me some of the key satellite systems that are part of the WinT program. I was also talking with Colonel Babbitt earlier. The new program of record, the T2C2, which is now under Increment 1, will be moving to SATCOM. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things going on in your organization?
Yeah, so POC3T satellite communications portfolio is comprised of about a dozen different programs, from one acquisition category 2 program, 2 acquisition category 3s, and up to 10 non-programs of record. There are about 4 of those that are directly engaged in support to deployed forces, the DCAT, or Deployable KU Earth Terminal, the SNAP, or SIPR Nipper Access Point, GRIP, which is the Global Rapid Response Information Package, and then the last one being GBS, Global Broadcast Service. And as you ask about the new program that transitioned from Increment 1, which is T2C2, or Transportable Tactical Command and Control, is a program that's really been developed to replace capability that we have on the battlefield today, both the SNAP and the GRIP. T2C2 will come out and provide enhanced capability for what we have for the warfighter today.
And as the U.S. continues to draw down in Afghanistan, how is the product manager, SATCOM, providing enduring communications to meet the future mission, Operation Resolute Support, which is the training and support mission that will begin in the 2015 timeframe?
So as the operational force diminishes in Afghanistan, the U.S. has a requirement for us to be able to continue to communicate. So what PDM SATCOM has done is postured satellite communications equipment to support a number of different contingencies in Afghanistan. We have about 4 systems that we have there. So the DCAT is primarily a satellite terminal that acts as a hub for brigade and above type communications. You have the SNAP system, which is a transit cased system that goes all the way down to the company FOB and provides reach back into the hub or the DCAT. You have a GRIP system that is used by small company teams to go out and can be established within less than 10 minutes to come up on the network. The one unique part about the GRIP system is it's not currently interoperable with the WinT network. It's actually on commercial L-band, and that's one of the reasons why the T2C2 program has been developed, is to get us back on military SATCOM so that we'll be integrated with the WinT program. And the last system we have that's forward, that's SATCOM based, is the Global Broadcast Service, and GBS, which provides actually imagery and terrain and weather data for the FOBs that are forward in Afghanistan.
Very good.
Barry, if I could add one thing.
Sure.
SATCOM also has a program underneath them for our satellite transportable trailers. And ultimately what that does is that provides the backbone for all of my communications nodes and for many of Colonel Hall's communication nodes as well. So I think you'll find that within WinT, SATCOM's products are rather pervasive.
Sure. And while you brought that up, Colonel, let's just stay with Inc. 1 for a second and talk about your en route mission command capability, since that is a satellite system. There's a lot of interest in that's all about keeping soldiers connected as they're en route to theaters of operation. So tell me a little bit about where you are with that.
Sure. We will be fielding the initial operational capability this November, and we'll be demonstrating it this coming February. And that initial operational capability is antennas on a small selected number of airplanes.
C-17s?
Yes. And then some baseband, one baseband package essentially, plus a training node that will allow the Airborne Task Force Commander to get access to all of his mission command applications. And also full motion video, and also VTC, and also phones, and also portal, email, et cetera, chat, those sorts of things. So there's going to be a robust communications capability there for the Airborne Task Force Commander, which is essentially the brigade commander essentially for the Global Response Forces Division Ready Brigade. So that is a transformative sort of capability. And as we go from that to the full operational capability, we're moving from one plane having that to 7 planes having that. And then a number of other planes hanging off of those planes using point-to-point comms between planes. So it's going to provide a lot of robust planning and communications capability for the Division Ready Brigade of the Global Response Force. So how this transforms things in a very simple way. The old way of doing it is you get on the plane, you get all kitted up with your equipment to jump, you're going en route to an objective area. It could be quite far, typically 12 to 16 hours to get overseas. During that time, all the communications that they had at that time was basically voice radio. Every once in a while you could get a channel on Inmarsat, but very rarely. And nowadays you pretty much can't get those channels. So it used to be get on the plane, sleep, arrive, make your plan based on the situation that's changed in the last 12 to 16 hours, and then execute. And that planning piece takes hours to do right. So the objective is with this new system, you get on the plane, you do your planning, and then you arrive and execute immediately. So we're immediately affecting the effectiveness of our global response force.
Sure. I would imagine, is that something that maybe the Marines are working on as well? Are you coordinating with them in any way?
They definitely have interest.
Okay. All right, very good. Colonel Swanson, what role will WIN-T play in bringing dismounted capabilities such as smartphones to the battlefield, and how will WIN-T synchronize its efforts with the developers of Army tactical radios and waveforms to enhance the tactical network?
That's a great question. So Lieutenant Colonel Babbitt under the Inc. program office is going to be leveraging some very nascent commercial capabilities. He touched on a couple of them, 4G LTE and Wi-Fi as well. And he successfully demonstrated that at the recent 14.2 event down at Fort Bliss as part of 14.2. So that'll do a couple things for you. The 4G LTE will allow handheld device operation extended distances away from the command posts. And then the Wi-Fi capability, it'll allow you to get rid of a lot of the cabling and the things that are within the command post. So you'll be much more agile and expeditionary. You'll be able to move a lot faster. When you set down, you don't have cables that you're hooking in everywhere. You're up and talking or passing data immediately. The second half of your question is how we work together really within POC3T, the 3 PMs. So there's 3 PMs within C3T. One of them is WIN-T, and people refer to us as the upper tactical internet, and then the other one is PM tactical radios. So they've got a lot of the lower they call it the lower tactical internet radios, and then there's the mission command applications that ride on the transport. So even though there's an LTI and a UTI, really it's one network. And that network has to pass traffic seamlessly, top to bottom and bottom to the top. And at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure the soldier on the edge has the information that he needs. So we work very closely together to make sure we're in sync on the transport part of it. And then whatever we're fielding, we've got to be able to support those mission command apps. And vice versa, those mission command apps have to be optimized to be able to operate on the transport, even if it's a satellite capability that's got some latency built into it, because the data is traveling, tens of thousands of miles up to the satellite and back. It's got to be a little bit tolerant of latencies and delays.
Sure. Yeah. And so mobility will be a WIN-T responsibility, rather than being a tactical radio's lower echelon responsibility, it'll be within WIN-T?
We both have mobility responsibilities, and that's where Lieutenant Colonel Hall and his Inc. 2 program comes in. But at the end of the day, where we're trying to get to is be much more agile and expeditionary. That means we can deploy a lot faster, and Lieutenant Colonel Babbitt talked a little bit about the EMC2 program, T2C2, which Lieutenant Colonel Newman's working on. That's going to help support becoming more expeditionary. And then as far as agility goes, the Wi-Fi and the 4G LTE to allow you to set down and break down and set up quicker. He's got a big piece in that, as well as Increment 2 as well.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Let's go back to Increment 2. and the FOT&E, the follow-on operational test and evaluation plan for White Sands Missile Range in the fall. Tell me a little bit about what you're hoping to accomplish. I guess the ultimate goal is to obtain a full rate production decision. And so what sort of things will you be doing out there in the desert?
So yes, that is correct. This is an operational test to obtain a full rate production decision. It's our second follow-on operational test, and so we've got somewhat of a narrow focus this time around. There are 3 key areas that we need to do well on for this operational test. The first area is we need to continue to improve the reliability of 2 parts of the INC2 network, and those 2 parts are the soldier network extension and the point of presence. The second key area that we need to improve.
Before you go on, can you explain the pop and sneeze and what they are and how they work?
Yes. So the WIN-T Increment 2 network covers several echelons. So at the highest echelon, at the division and brigade level, we've got several pieces of equipment. We've got the satellite terminals that were mentioned earlier. We've got the tactical communication nodes, and then we have our network operations and security centers. When you move down to the battalion level, then the point of presence is the vehicle at the battalion level for the battalion level commanders. It has the line of sight network, and it also has the satellite capability that you mentioned in your introduction. And then as you move down to the lowest echelons, which are the company echelons, you have the soldier network extensions, which have just the satellite communication capabilities spread out across all the different company level units.
And if you obtain that full rate production decision, and I'm sure you will, what's the plan to produce? What will you be producing when you get that?
I like your enthusiasm and your positive thinking here. Yes, so that is definitely our intent. We're trying very hard and working very hard to get to that point. So with a full rate production decision, what that means is we have to go through a defense acquisition board with the defense acquisition executive, the Honorable Mr. Kendall, and he is the one that authorizes us to procure additional units. And so that full rate production decision will give us the authorization to buy more equipment so that we can continue fielding INC2 throughout the Army. Right now, we're limited to the fielding of the equipment that we've been authorized to date, which will get us roughly through the year of FY16. And so that full rate production decision will give us the authorization to continue to procure and field Increment 2 beyond FY16.
And is there a determination of how many vehicles, how much will be produced if you get that decision?
So yes, and we've got some fielding plans that are laid out, and so WIN-T Increment 2 is a long-term program. We're scheduled to continue to field equipment all the way out to the year 2025 until we have fielded the entire Army. And so yes, we do have fielding plans of numbers of units and equipment quantities that we need year by year to continue fielding beyond FY16.
Okay, and maybe Colonel Swanson, you can offer a few more details about maybe Korea and other areas in the world that would be suitable for WIN-T deployments?
Well, because of the nature of Increment 2, they're suitable for anywhere in the world because they're heavily SATCOM based. So, they're not line of sight, so they were optimal for Afghanistan where you have terrain like that, where you have very limited line of sight. So, anywhere, even with areas of the world where you've got very little infrastructure, such as Africa, would be an ideal deployment. I would like to touch upon the operational test if we get. And I like your enthusiasm as well. When we get that full rate production in May of 15 from Mr. Kendall, we don't have to focus on going back to these large-scale operational tests anymore. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort, and we can focus more on continuing to improve the capability of the equipment that we're fielding, as well as our focus will be providing those capabilities to the soldier. Right now we're doing that, and at the same time we're trying to prep for these large-scale operational tests.
Sure. WIN-T has been responsible for a lot of the testing going on at White Sands. What do you think will happen to the NIEs after WIN-T is no longer being tested? Are there other things that you have and maybe some of the other PMs have planned for 16.1, 16.2, that sort of thing?
I'll tackle that in two pieces, Barry. The first piece is that we will leverage that because we fielded capabilities down to it's the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Armored Division that's stationed down there at Fort Bliss. And I'll give you an example. At 14-2, Lieutenant Colonel Babbitt did a number of demonstrations for the 4G LTE, the Wi-Fi, the Tropo, and some other capabilities as well. And Lieutenant Colonel Roberts had a couple demos there as well for netops and some other things as well. But so we will continue to leverage that, but there's many other programs out there, the lower tactical internet radios, as well as systems such as D6 Alpha that will continue to do operational tests down at the NIE. So I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Very good.
And Barry, just a quick follow-on to that. So just because WinT Increment 2 is not a system under test or part of the operational test at NIE, the network is still there. It is the base of everything that goes on at NIE. So for every NIE that we have, the WinT Increment 2 network will be fully deployed. The only difference following 15.1 is it won't be a system under test. It won't be formally evaluated by the operational test evaluators. It will still be there performing the same functions. We'll continue to get feedback from the soldiers from that event. We'll look at how the network is performing and continue to do whatever we can to improve the WinT Increment 2 network.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So it's they call that a baseline system. So we first fielded Increment 2 at NIE 12.2, and that was several years ago. That has stayed fielded, and then we just continue to upgrade that over time. So we're part of the baseline down at the NIE. It's just when we go back and do these large operational tests, we put a lot of time and focus into that operational test.
Sure. And I was there at 12.2, and I'm looking forward to coming out this fall and see how you guys do.
Yeah, as was I. So,
Colonel Roberts, NetOps is often a difficult thing to do, and is something that private industry also spends a lot of time working on, their own company networks and things like that. How are you leveraging the commercial sector as far as best practices in NetOps for the tactical network?
So the majority of the software we fielded is commercial software. We use a lot of the same techniques and the same tools that Verizon does in their network operations center. So we've taken a lot of those tools and been working with industry to customize those tools where it's appropriate to our unique military instantiation. But there's a great opportunity for us to keep working with industry to identify where commercial tools are generally focused on a solid, stable infrastructure with fiber optics going to your house and that hardwired to your computer. So we're looking at where those tools can be improved and then integrated with some of the tools that we developed for the unique military instantiations of the software. And then continuing to look at how we can talk to the industry, tell them the capabilities we're needing, looking at where industry can identify core capabilities they have, and finding those unique, innovative companies out there that have a core capability that we haven't touched yet, where they can look at how to take two pieces of other people's technology and bring them all together to make that simpler and easier to use for the warfighter.
Very good. Colonel Roberts, let's talk a little bit more about SATCOM again. How does the product manager for satellite communications respond directly to requirements from the field and tailor capabilities to direct needs of the soldier? So how does the SATCOM connect to the soldier as far as accomplishing what it is that they need to do in a tactical environment?
So actually, we're uniquely organized to do that. We actually created a commercial satellites terminals program office within PDM SATCOM back in 1999. And for many years now, we've taken commercial capability and provided it rather quickly to soldiers in the field. A good example of that is in this FY, just FY14, the past 10 months, we responded to 10 operational need statements across the Army and fielded more than 100 snap and grip systems to units that are forward deployed. We're also a cradle to grave organization where we start with the user need and identifying that. Once we have a identified user need that's valid, we engage with the user directly, work with them to understand the requirement, begin to refine it, and engage industry to work those efforts. We put together a tailored acquisition package. We also partner with the Army Acquisition Contracting Command to put out an acquisition requirements package and getting feedback from industry to be able to provide those capabilities, usually on time and sometimes ahead of schedule, based upon what the user requires.
And Lieutenant Colonel Newman, sorry for misstating your name a moment ago. How are you working with the private industry to make sure that they're offering and developing the sort of SATCOM capabilities that the Army needs today?
So within PDM SATCOM, we actually have a team that works our acquisition packages in CSDP. We have a large contract, the Global Tactical Acquisition Communications Systems contract, that allows us up to a ceiling of $10 billion in an ordering period of 5 years to engage with industry. And what it really does for us is encourage competition. We have more than 20 primes that are able to compete on that particular contract and provide capability to the warfighter. We work very closely with them to get it on contract as quickly as possible and to deliver the capability very closely. So through that office as well as that contracting vehicle, we interface with, or I interface with industry rather frequently.
And going along with the simplification topic that we were discussing earlier, at a couple of the NIEs that I was at, it's often it's a laborious, lengthy process sometimes to get the terminals to connect and work. What are your endeavors as far as bringing simplification to satellite communications?
So as Colonel Hall spoke about in Increment 2, part of the baseline system, so the SIPR-NIPR access point or the SNAP is also a baseline system, provides the network at NIE. And so as we have gotten feedback from the users in 86th ESP at WSMR, they tell us these are different ways that we can use and employ the SNAPs. So we've gotten feedback with regard to setting the system up, reducing the number of steps so that they have less steps they have to go through, actually automating some of the steps so that the system comes up with less steps from the user, as well as giving, again, a green light or some kind of visual signal to tell them, yes, you have satellite connection from that standpoint. So the SNAP system has been directly involved in the NIEs out there and trying to simplify the network.
We hear a lot about reducing size, weight, and power for SATCOM systems. Often it's more of a special forces sort of thing, the man-portable VSATs. Is the Army looking at anything like that?
We are. So from using the SNAP system as another example, transit case system, I would tell you when it first deployed in 2007 and first used, it was about a 12 or 13 case system. We've now been able to reduce it down to 5 cases, and we've also increased its capability, increased the bandwidth that we're with the system while we're reducing that size. Also added additional bands that we support. So initially it was a commercial KU band system. We've added military satellite systems, the KA band, as well as the X band to the capability as well.
Very good.
We can talk about the T2C2 Lite as well. That's something that's very man-portable and that we're working on. We'll be deploying in the next, probably for the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, so T2C2 Lite, which is a program that we continue to work as well. There are some commercial solutions that we've done, some market research to identify that will satisfy that. It will significantly reduce the size of the systems we have and increase the throughput that we currently have. It'll get us off of the commercial, which is more expensive, and onto the military satellites, which is something that's already been paid for through this military satellite systems.
Sure. And Colonel, that's a new program of record. They don't come around too often. Are there any other programs of record coming down the pike for WIN-T?
A couple of the ones I think we've already talked about, the T2C2, which is it's right now in the process of transitioning from Increment 1 over to SATCOM. You talked about EMC2 and the capabilities that's going to bring to the global response force that Colonel Babbitt's working on.
So that'll be a program of record as well?
Well, that's TBD right now. We have to go through a process. It's called a material development decision, where we take it to senior acquisition leadership, and then they take a look at the scope of the program, and hopefully with getting the capability out there as quickly as possible, we can streamline things. But so that's a TBD. We have to go back and get that decision yet. Yep.
And so what is it that, what overarching requirements can industry help WIN-T solve, and what role will industry play in WIN-T of the future?
As you know, Barry, we can't, as much as we like to, we can't do it ourselves. So our industry partners are very important. They're the ones who actually help develop the equipment and then produce the equipment and help us field it and then sustain it. So The two main areas I think we've already touched on today. One is making the equipment much easier to install, operate, and maintain, making it less complex. Holy Grail is probably holding up your iPhone or your handheld device, but reality is that WinT brings the whole network. So we bring that whole infrastructure. You don't see the network operations centers, all the cellular towers, all that. We have to be ready to bring that with us. The other piece of it is swap, and you talked a little bit about that. So the size, we want to make it as light as possible for the soldiers to have to carry. That's the weight part of it. The size, we want to make it as small as possible as well. And then the power, we want to make it so it takes as little power as possible. So if it's operating on batteries that you have to throw in a backpack, you don't have to carry as much. So we want to do all that without sacrificing capability and ideally even increasing capability. So those are two areas, making the equipment easier to operate, maintain, and also to reduce swap.
Sure.
Barry, on that, so Increment 2, I get that question a lot. So Increment 2, a large portion of that network is commercial off-the-shelf hardware and software. And so when the commercial vendors ask that, there are three things that we always say. So simplification, which we hit on, reliability. The system cannot be too reliable. And so we have a very different environment that we operate in the Army than the commercial world. And especially when you start looking at servers, routers, switches, which are traditionally located in a fixed server facility, something like we have here with very consistent power, the same temperature, controlled dust, and all the other environmental conditions that server room enjoys. We take those components from the commercial world and we now load them in the back of an MATV truck and we bounce them across the desert for days on end. And so being able to have the commercial world understand that that's the environment that we're going to use the commercial systems in, so that, number one, the simplification piece for WinT Increment 2 comes down to that I need to have a general purpose user. I need to have a general soldier, a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old soldier, be able to operate a Cisco router. And so there's challenges associated with that. I don't have the highly trained Cisco technicians that work in a fixed site server room. And so our challenge, we need to simplify the system by taking the commercial hardware and software, putting it into the military environment, and then abstracting away the hard configuration items that go into that so that it can be operated by a general purpose user reliably in that austere environment. And then the third piece of that stool is we always want to increase our capability. So more bandwidth, size, weight, and power, all those things play into what we're looking for in terms of industry help in the future.
Sure, and just picking up off of what Colonel Hall said about bandwidth, Colonel Swanson, how will the Army use this increased bandwidth? What would you would like? Everyone wants more bandwidth. What could you do with it if you could get it?
So more is better. So whether it's at your house, your wireless router at your house or at work, you want as much bandwidth as possible, because in general you can do more and you can do things more quickly. So the more capability we can provide as far as transport, the more of those mission command applications and capabilities can ride on that transport. And you can virtualize capabilities by putting things in the commercial sector. They talk about the cloud. So you can possibly put capabilities in the cloud that you don't have to carry with you, and then the transport can reach back and provide those capabilities instantaneously when they need them.
And I guess that would be dependent, of course, on developing some sort of secure cloud. Does PM WinT have any input into what the Army is doing to develop a secure cloud?
There are working groups and forums that are taking a look at all that, and our role in that for PM WinT is to make sure they're taking in the factors of transport, that they're not assuming away satellite latencies and some of the constraints you have with transport. So we try to minimize that as much as possible, but there's still physics you have to deal with. So whenever they're making those decisions, we want to make sure they're taking into planning considerations of what the transport brings and what we don't bring.
Let me conclude with a question about the future of WinT. I wonder if everyone might offer a comment or two of where you think your organizations are going over time. What are the things everyone is very much focused on the fight today, but that's going to be ending shortly, and so you're looking to what's coming next. And I wonder if we can go around the table and talk a little bit about where the organizations are going next. So, Lieutenant Colonel Newman, where's SATCOM going?
So from a SATCOM perspective, we are going through a transition to bring T2, C2 from Increment 1 to SATCOM. That's a program that's going to be around through 2025. We'll be able to test that out, be able to feel that capability and support it throughout that time period. For a number of other programs, particularly Smart T and Phoenix, there are potentially some requirements documents that are going to extend the life of those programs. Those programs were scheduled to transition to sustainment in the FY16, FY17 timeframe. If those requirements documents are approved, then we'll be able to extend those programs to continue to provide enhanced capability to the warfighter. A number of other programs, some of the non-PORs or programs of record, like the DCAT and the SNAP, will again be evaluated as to whether or not they should transition and continue to provide support. Most of those are customer supported programs, and it's my belief as they continue to provide enhanced capabilities, then the customers will continue to fund them, even in some of the fiscal constrained environments. The ability of those programs to respond to the customer's needs and meet their requirements will bring them to the top and allow them to continue to receive funding, or at least be identified as highest priority because they're providing the needs that the customers have.
Very good. Lieutenant Colonel Babbitt?
So we've got a number of things going on within WIN-T Increment 1, but our focuses really are all about getting smaller, lighter, higher bandwidth, better computing capabilities. We're virtualizing things, so we're getting rid of a lot of our hardware and going to virtual appliances, software essentially. We're untethering commanders. We're untethering the staff from the talks. We're getting rid of wires. We're getting rid of cables. We're doing everything we can to lighten the burden on the signal soldier while still increasing capability and increasing the range of our communications. Joint and coalition interoperability are focuses that we demonstrated out at NIE 14.2 and that we'll continue to work on because the U.S. doesn't fight alone. And not only that, civil support for the National Guard. Katrina and Rita and Hurricane Sandy and all those natural disasters, we've got a program called GISC, and that will be rolling out to the 54 states and territories, and that will be providing an immediate disaster response capability.
Communications capability?
Absolutely, yes. So it's basically it's a joint network node, the core of my network, plus 4G and Wi-Fi, and a mission network enclave that provides commercial capability, plus a radio bridging voice crossbanding capability. So back in the day, well actually right now, when first responders show up, you've got police and fire, they generally can talk together, but you bring police and fire from other locations, they can't necessarily talk to the police and fire from the disaster location. And National Guard, they have a hard time, basically National Guard comes and brings radios and gives it to the police and firemen. So what we're doing is we're providing a radio bridging capability that will allow, no matter what radio you have, to talk to each other. And also a commercial internet capability, 4G Wi-Fi, so that first responders will have that capability at a disaster response site.
Interesting. Colonel Roberts, what's on tap for netops in the future?
So Increment 3 actually has a couple things we're doing near term. We are working on the network operations tools for both Increment 1 and Increment 2 to provide some enhancements to integrate some of the tools that are already out there so we can get a little simpler use and more unification for the signal soldier to operate the network. We also have one of our holdover tasks is to complete some of the waveform development. So we have been responsible for developing the NetCentric waveform, which supports the on-the-move capability. So we've got the next instantiation of that waveform that will be coming out in the next couple of years. And then beyond that, as we move past the Increment 3 POR, we're looking at taking that same unification effort we've been doing within the WIN-T portfolio and tying in lower tier network planning, ComSec, application management, and looking how all the partner PMs within WIN-T and within C3T are giving tools to the soldier and making sure that we give them tools that are integrated and where possible behind the scenes are taking care of some of those tasks so we can make his job easier.
Very good. Lieutenant Colonel Hall?
So yes, good. We've covered 3 of the main items that we're working on: the simplification piece, the reliability piece, and the increasing the capabilities. So I won't focus on those, but we'll discuss fielding a little bit. So Increment 2 is heavily involved in fielding throughout the Army right now. We're going to field 5 brigade combat teams this year, plus 2 division headquarters, and so we're doing that simultaneously while executing all of the operational test events that we discussed, and then additionally supporting the drawdown in Afghanistan. Moving forward into the future, one of the things that we're doing this year is we're starting to field Increment 2 on the Stryker Brigade combat teams, and so on the Stryker platform, and then in the future, in the FY 19-20 timeframe, we'll eventually transition to fielding on the armor heavy platforms as well. And so Increment 2 will continue to field this capability for the foreseeable future, building on what we've done already with the infantry brigade combat teams. Like I said, building on the Stryker Brigade combat teams, and then eventually transitioning into the armor and the heavy brigade combat teams.
Very good. And Colonel Swanson, where do you see from a overarching strategic kind of view, where will this PM be in a couple of years' time?
So our priority and focus over the last decade has been on supporting the fight, and that's where it should have been. So we're getting out of the fight now. So I'll put in a little plug for one of my boss's initiatives right now. Because we've been so, I guess, myopically focused, we haven't been looking out, right? Because we have concerns that we had to take care of today. So he's got a couple of initiatives. One of them is called StarNet. So that's looking at from fiscal year 16 to 20, what capabilities are in the pipeline or aren't in the pipeline that we need. And then past that, 2020 and beyond, it's called Network After Next. So we're supporting that right now. We're developing technology roadmaps, working with our TRADOC partners on what capabilities are needed and what technologies we need to be looking at to bring those capabilities to the fight.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank everyone in the WIN-T team for taking an hour out of their busy days to join us for the C4ISR Networks webcast. That concludes our video roundtable with the PM WIN-T leadership team. Thank you for joining us today. And additional videos and webcasts can be found at c4isrnet.com. Thank you.